Audio is not unlike using images inside this program, where the difficult part is just going and getting the audio, preparing the audio, and having the clip the right way. Just like with the images, just finding the images, making sure they're royalty-free, bringing them into Photoshop, making sure they're the right size. You actually import audio in the exact same way you import images. We're going to find some audio files, stick them in our assets folder, and just go to File, Import, and bring them in. It's even relatively easy to add audio to the timeline. You add it to a keyframe, just like you add images or code or shapes or anything. You just add it to keyframes, and it's pretty easy, and the sound just plays where you want it to. So in some sense, sound effects and things are really easy to just throw in the timeline, and that's what we're going to start with. Then we can get a little more complicated when it comes to like looping sounds and trying to make background music going all the time and stuff like that. And you'll see a couple of pitfalls that we'll work through probably the next class. But for today, let's just get started with some basic sound. What I want is I want 3 different sounds. I want one sound for when I actually click a button. So just a real quick little blip or click or bloop or something like that. Just a quick little sound. It's very, very short, much less than a second, just to click the button. The second sound we want to find is we want to find a page transition sound. A sound that'll play once we click the button, and it'll play during our transition, which our transition's only a third of a second right now. They're pretty fast, so we'll also want a relatively quick sound. We could probably get away with about a full second of a transition sound, even if it plays a little bit longer. Or we can even lengthen our transitions a little bit, give them a little time to match the sound, see what we end up with. So I want a button click sound. I want a page transition sound, like a whoosh or something like that. And then finally, those are both sound effects. The third one is we're going to want a sound, like a music loop, something that we can just loop through and play as background music underneath our sound effects. So that's pretty common to want to have some kind of background music, and then obviously throwing sound effects on different things like animations and button clicks. So I'll show you how all 3 of those work. But the first step before we can do that is we have to go find these sounds. So let's search for button. Sure, a button click. Now, one thing we want to look for is it will technically work with like a WAV file or an ACC, but we definitely want it to be a MP3 file. That's what the web wants to use. Make sure whatever sounds that you get for your project, if you get your own, that we want some kind of MP3 file. Give us something decent. Whoops. It's just downloading it. Well, maybe we'll just go with that one because it downloaded twice, whatever it may be. Let's see what this is. Sure. It's a boring little button click. Click, click. All right, we'll take that. So I've got a button click. Now I want some kind of page transition. So let's go with transition. There we go. Gain air slide transition. It sounds perfect. Okay. So I'm going to right click, save link as. Downloads. Okay, so that's a WAV file, but I'll just show you how to save it as an MP3 real quickly. So I'll get that to my downloads. All right. Now I want some kind of loop. There it is. Yep, freesound.org. This is a good one. Let's search for, I don't know, let's just see what this gives us when we give it generic and say loop. String solo violin loop, 7 seconds long. It's perfect for our bunny background music. Let's just use that. So from here, put it inside of this assets folder, all right, where our bunnies PSD and our bunny images are. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to grab, first of all, the button one. Easy little click, that's going to go right in there because that's already an MP3. Upload that to it. There we go. And then this other one that's a WAV file, I'm going to convert this to an MP3. I'm going to show you an easy way to do it is if you've got all the Adobe tools, you can open up Adobe Audition, which is their audio tool. Or you can use GarageBand or whatever else you may want to use. You can even use Adobe Premiere, which is their video tools, but this seems to be the audio-specific, quickest way that I know of to do it. And here we go. We have Adobe Audition, and we don't care about anything but just opening a file. So we're going to File, Open, and I'm going to find in my downloads this WAV file. Okay, and here it is. And then we don't need to worry about this crazy interface or anything about it. We could use this to like cut pieces of it and do all kinds of things, but all we want to do is make an MP3. So I should be able to File, Export, File. So after I opened it, I exported it, and notice it's automatically trying to make it an MP3 for me. So I'm just going to browse to where I want it in my downloads and hit Save. Hit OK. I should be able to quit this program, so I didn't need to know anything about that other than I can open a WAV in it and then export it as an MP3. And again, the reason we do that is MP3s are usually, so like this WAV file is 157 kilobytes, the similar MP3 is only 16 kilobytes, usually much smaller in file size, and there's just many reasons why the web prefers an MP3. So I'm going to copy that up here, and then we'll go ahead and convert this strings WAV as well. So I've got this, I'm going to download it, open Audition back up. And again, you can do this with GarageBand or something else as well. But I will go open what I just downloaded, this, nope, this. There we go. Open the WAV, File, Export File, and just already saving to my downloads, just save it as the MP3 and quit. Okay, so now I will copy the MP3, not sure where this PKF thing is, but MP3 seems to work, so I'll copy that up there. We'll get rid of the WAV. Remove, there we go. Okay, so now I want you to get all of these three sounds. Now that we've got them, I want you to put these in your personal assets folder in your website folder that you're working in. Okay, so I've got 2 out of the 3 sitting here. I'm going to download my button again here. Okay, so I've got my button. Click, my transition whoosh, and then my background music. All right, now I'm going to copy all of these. Just going to go copy onto my desktop, website, assets folder, put them in my assets folder. Got them all in there. Go back to my downloads and delete them so I don't need them anymore. And looking at my website folder, where again, super important that you're not just willy-nilly working off of an FLA somewhere. You must keep track of your files you're working on, and you must have a folder that's holding all of your files, including your FLA, but also including your HTML, JavaScript, your images folder, the recover file it automatically makes, the images folder that gets automatically generated, but then you've got your assets folder, which holds the thing the program is going to pull things out of. So we originally put our images in here, then we imported our bunnies PSD out of here, and now we've got our sound in here, and it's really important to put them in these images, in this assets folder, because once we import them into Animate and we start using them on the timeline, in the same way that when we publish, Animate automatically creates an images folder, it will automatically create a sounds folder and put a copy of each MP3 into the sounds folder. Now, you may ask, well, why don't we just make a sounds folder and put them in there? I don't know why, but it requires you to copy them out of one folder to be able to create the other one dynamically on its own. So we have to have them kind of living. It will be the same thing with video. We have to have them kind of living in our assets folder for it to pull from and generate the sounds folder that will then work on the web. So all of that being said, you know, sound schmound, we now just have some MP3s to pull in. That's all you really need. So when you're working on your own project, whether you're making your own sounds, using these resources to get some, just as long as you've got MP3s, it's really easy to convert a WAV or an AAC or something to one using Audition. And once you've got them in your assets folder, now we're ready to go. So go back and open up your Bodacious Bunnies Animate file. And we're going to import these assets. Right now I have all of my layers locked. And if I were to try and import something with File, Import, actually because all the layers are locked, it doesn't let me import the stage. I could, in theory, import all these sounds to the stage and I could see the WAV files for at least one of them. But that's not what I want. Usually when I'm importing sound, I just want to import it into the library first, so I've got it in there, and then later on I'll go back and put it where I want on the timeline. So let's do that. So you can just basically be anywhere. It doesn't matter where you are in your timeline. Just go up to File, Import, and then Import to Library. And that will open up your import dialog box, in which case you can then navigate to your assets folder and you can select, you can either do it one at a time, or I'm going to hold Command here to select all 3 of my MP3 files at once. You could do File, Import one at a time and if you want, but I'm just going to grab them all. Hit Open. What? It didn't like the button one. Let me see if it, let me try and import a single one and see if it's just one that's causing a problem. Import to library. Okay, so it didn't like the button. Let me try the strings background music. Okay, so that's fine. Apparently we're going to have to change our button MP3, but I know what to do. Go to File, Import, Import to Library, and now I'll choose the slide transition. Okay, that also imports. Well, I'm glad this happened because this can happen sometimes and we just have to think outside the box and think a way around it. For some reason, I'm going to File, Import, and try and import that button sound. It craps. It doesn't like it. Couldn't import it. Okay. Why? I don't know. But what we can do is, it just happens to be that that was the only one. The other 2 we converted to MP3s out of Audition. This one we did not. Let's see what happens if we just run through this and run this through Audition, export it in the same way, give it a different file name, and see if it'll work. Usually there's like some kind of setting, like compression setting with the MP3 that it's not liking when it doesn't like to import like that. We may end up having to go get a different button, but let's see. I've got Audition open. Go back to my Finder. I'm just going to drag the button on here, which is the same thing as importing. And then go to File, Export, File. And I want to browse to my desktop website assets folder. And I'm going to name it, I'm just going to name it, so button-30. I'm just going to name it, I don't know, button, sure, button.mp3. See if that works. So I go back to Animate. And now I try to File, Import to Library, choose Button MP3. Sweet, that worked. And each one you should be able to click on, see its waveform, and then you got this little play thing at the very top. Let you kind of play through it. I'll just mention in the library here, it's not too complicated yet, but if you were to work on something like your own project, it'll probably get 10 times more complicated than this little bunny thing we're working on. Sometimes it's really helpful to start organizing your stuff in folders. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to select, I'm just going to make a new folder down here. There's this little new folder icon. We'll make a folder for sound. And I'm just going to drag my 3 sounds inside of it so I have them all together. I could make a folder for buttons. I could make a folder for movie clips. I could make a folder for pages, whatever. But just getting used to kind of organizing your symbols is a good thing to do. So let's made a little sound folder that I got them all in there. But as you'll see in a moment, it doesn't really matter when we're adding sound. There's a way that Animate kind of pulls them in automatically for you. We have our sounds in here, and it's really easy to add simple sound effects. Show you what I mean. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our swooshing transition. In fact, I'm going to rename these. My button one is named button, but inside of Animate, sometimes it could be helpful. All right, so this whatever long name, I'm just going to right click and choose rename, and I'm just going to name it swoosh.mp3. And then this long name, I'm going to right click and rename this one to music.mp3. All right, so I've got music, I've got button, and I've got swoosh. And it's just a little easier for me to know what's what now. It doesn't matter what they are in my asset folder. This at least kind of keeps track of them in here. So now we're going to do the swoosh first. I think that's the easiest. Is we literally just need to place these transition or the sound at the beginning of each animation. Now we have to put sound on a keyframe, and we could technically connect it to the actual keyframe where the tween is happening, but that's not really good form. It's better practice to have our own layer for sound. So I'm going to put a layer directly underneath code and name it sound. And that's basically putting it at the top, except for I always leave the code layer at the top to have my labels and all of my commands and everything all readily accessible. So then the sound layer, what I want to do is I want to put a keyframe. I want this sound to happen when we hit page 1. Okay, as soon as we hit page 1, I want the sound to happen. And the way initially sounds work is no matter how long the sound is, if it's a half a second or if it's a half an hour, as soon as the playhead touches the keyframe that the sound starts on, it'll play the entire sound. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's put a keyframe on page 1 right here. So on page 1 means not necessarily at the end of it here, but right where our page 1 label starts, because that's when our sound's going to want to start. Is as soon as we start this transition, we want that sound to happen, that whoosh, as our transition happens. So I have a keyframe here, sound layer, keyframe directly on page 1. And now here's how you add sound. It's super easy. We just have the keyframe selected. As long as the keyframe is selected where we want the sound to go, on the sound layer, on page 1. Now I go to the properties panel. And on the properties panel, this is before where we had this label thing where we would type in to get a frame label, but that's not what we're going to do here. Underneath that, there's a sound drop-down. And inside of the sound drop-down, there's this little name box that starts off with none. Once again, make sure you have the right keyframe selected. Make sure you're on your sound layer and you put a keyframe for sound, or for this sound right on page 1. And now over here in the properties panel with that keyframe selected, we can open none, and this will show us a list of all the sounds we have in our library. All right, so it shows me button, music, and swoosh. I'm gonna go ahead and choose swoosh, and you can see that it shows me the waveform of the sound on the timeline. Now this is a little confusing because it's actually long enough, it's actually like over a full second long. Third of a second, or it's about a full second long. So it's longer than our transition, and we're gonna adjust our animation to kind of match that, or at least get closer to it. But right now, even though it plays and you can see the waveform across into page 2, I wanna show you how this works in the browser, that it only matters where the sound starts, all right? So if we go to page 1, it's only gonna play this part of the timeline, but it's gonna play the entire sound, because as soon as it touches this frame, it plays the whole thing. Now, if we jump to page 2 without jumping to page 1 first, it's not going to play anything. Even though the waveform is showing up here on the timeline, it never touches that keyframe that starts the sound out. That's really important to remember. So if I publish my movie now, I have that sound in here. If I hit page 1, there's my sound. So it's not too bad, like it's relatively close It just goes a little longer than it should, but it's not too bad. Like, you could honestly get away with that. And then if I hit this one, I hear nothing because it's not starting it out. Okay, so that's the easiest way, is we can just throw sound effects anywhere we want along the timeline while we're jumping to the different spots. We'll go to and stop, or if we're jumping to animations, we'll go to and play, or even if we're just playing along in a linear timeline, we can pop sounds in wherever we want, and just wherever the timeline hits, whether it's linear or if we're jumping around with buttons, that's where the stuff is going to hit. Now, I want to extend these animations out a little bit to cover that sound a little more. But I want to increase this page one animation before I go any further. And to do that, to make this longer, right now it's only 1/3 of a second. The issue is I want to add more time to every single layer at once. Okay, if I were to just try and add time like just to this, of course using F5 for insert frames, if I were to just add time to the animation, all of a sudden all my page labels are going to be off and they're not going to match up with my animations anymore, and all my buttons are going to be chaos and nothing's going to work. So if I'm adding time to this animation, I want to make it match the sound a little better, I need to do it to all the layers at once. Okay, and there's kind of 2 ways to do that. You can either literally select every layer. So if I just select down every layer at once, kind of selects one frame, I can use F5 to just add time, and that's going to continuously stretch out this animation and push all the layers together so my other animations still stay together. Now, the reason I'm showing you these 2 different ways is you can either select the frames, and that's interesting because you can select more than one. So I could select like 5 frames down all the layers. And now if I hit F5, it jumps 5 frames at a time. Now again, F5 versus F5 and Shift F5 to add frames, remove frames is a lot faster than right-clicking, insert frame, or using this thing. And is it keyframe? No, it's frame. And using that, it's like 2 clicks versus, you know, but either way works. Just I'll keep harping on that, you know, if you want to be professional in this field, whatever program you use a lot, you should certainly learn some hotkeys. It will save you a lot of time. The other way, besides actually selecting layers and frames, is actually making sure nothing is selected. And then it'll insert across all layers as long as, you know, wherever the playhead is. So if I just have the playhead here in the middle somewhere, if I had some selection, as long as I click on the playhead, it will deselect. Now I can use F5 and Shift F5 to move around and either add layers or delete layers, frames across all the layers together. So I'm showing you this again just to kind of show you how, I mean, I use this all the time when I'm editing a timeline. I've got something I need to spread out. So I'm just going to throw this in here. I'm just going to tap F5 until it spreads out a little bit and fills out that sound, right? So I don't think I'm going to make it this long because this is literally 10, 20. This is a full second. This would match the sound completely. Let's take a look at it and see how it seems. I guess that's good, but it seems the transition itself, like the sound sounds good, but the transition itself just seems a little slow in a full second. Right? It seems a little slow and clunky. I'm actually going to kind of find a happy medium and just go back to a half second. It was only 1/3 of a second, which was 10 frames. I'm going to make it 15 frames. Actually, I'm going to double them. Instead of being 10, I'm going to make them each 20 frames long. So I'm going to bring this back using Shift F5 to only 20 frames long. So it's twice as long as it was. It's still using the page transition sound here, and it still goes on further, but not quite as much. So now I run it. There we go. That even feels like it fits better. It's still kind of slow, but it's fast enough. And the actual sound kind of fits that motion like that. Adding a sound is simple enough, but I'm going to make all 4 of these pages have the exact same length and the exact same sound. Now, I can do it really quickly because, first of all, I'm going to use F5 to just stick this in the middle and hit F5 10 times in between each one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Boom, I just added 10 frames. Boom. Do the same thing to these real quickly. Same thing to this one. So just like that, just tapping my, my F5 key and sticking this in the middle, I could extend all of those animations and all of the layers and everything to have a full 2/3 of a second instead of 1/3 of a second. So it's really quick to update those. And then to repeat this sound, again, we can just copy this keyframe. We could, in theory, make a keyframe and attach the sound, make a keyframe and attach the sound, make a keyframe and attach the sound. But it's going to be faster for us to use what we've already done. So if I just select this one keyframe on the sound layer that has the sound on it, I can hold Alt. We've done this a couple different times now to copy stop commands and to copy different keyframes with labels on them and stuff. But if I hold the Alt key and then click and drag, I can actually drag a copy of it to the beginning of each page. So it ends up looking like this, but just real quickly, I just extended all those pages to 20 seconds, and then I just copied the keyframe with, I could have also right-clicked and chosen copy frames, and then right-clicked and chosen paste frames. But that holding Alt is kind of a shortcut to that even. Hold Alt, click and drag. And that works with not only singular keyframes, but it works with entire selections. You could select whole sets of things and copy them that way. Copied a couple whole tweens like that. Now that I've set this up, each animation is 20 seconds, and each animation has the same sound, has a keyframe right at the beginning of it. So I'm going to save my file, I'm going to run it, and now each of these there we go. It even slows down the transition so you can see them a little bit better. I think that works really well. So if you peek at your Finder in your project folder, once you added a sound and you publish it, it adds a sounds folder and takes a copy of it and sticks it in there. But the important thing is with the sounds to just know that we import sounds to the library and then we attach them to a keyframe using the properties panel right here. The rest of it was just timing. Just I wanted my animations to be twice as long. Talked about using F5 and Shift F5 to adjust that. The number of frames across all layers, kind of quickly do that. And then just kind of copying the sound in a couple different places.